Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about Episode 9 of Season 5 of Star Wars The Clone Wars, called A Necessary Bond. And I know I referred to the last episode of the show as A Necessary Bond. That was indeed a screw up on my part. Thank you to the commentator who pointed that out to me. I did fix that in the description, but I'd have basically had to go back and completely re-edit the video in order to fix it there. So there will forever be that little glaring omission and glaring mistake in the titles of the last episode. But hey, okay, mistakes happen. So anyway, we wrap up our storyline with the younglings and Ahsoka and Hondo this time around, and overall, I feel that this is a reasonably decent story. It certainly proved to be, well, for one, not the one shot that I was expecting, and honestly, this was a bit of a risk, spending so much time focusing on younglings, putting them in situations like this. I think I even flat out compared this what was going on here to Spy Kids at one point. And doing something like that is always a little bit of a risk because at the end of the day, Clone Wars is a reasonably serious show, and putting some kids out there and basically fighting pirates in this during this wartime, throwing folks like Grievous into the mix, yeah, and having it not, as I said, basically being able to have any real respect for the bad guys or the opposition if they basically got beat by a bunch of kids afterwards, that was again also a risk. But while Hondo didn't come out looking so great last time, at least they did give the passable excuse of him being drunk for part of what happened. But anyway, to bring it back to what I was saying, yeah, overall, I think that this story did work. The kids are all reasonably well fleshed out. They're likable, they're interesting, and they're capable. And all right, so maybe there was a little bit of a kids movie vibe going on to some of this stuff, but again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Look at the Goonies. That's a bunch of kids fighting. Well, not exactly pirates, but fighting criminals and searching for pirate treasure. And honestly, I have yet to find a person anywhere that does not like the Goonies. So okay, I'm willing to give this one. I'm willing to give the kids and all this overall a thumbs up. But now let's start getting into some of the specifics. Let me just kind of glance at my notes here. This was actually in many ways mostly an action episode. The characterization stuff was a little bit on the lighter side. So so there's not as much to talk about this episode as I would like. But I'm still going to give it an effort. First of all, I did get a big kick out of Ahsoka using that mast to sort of keep the vehicle that they were driving steady. It sort of reminds me of the old brick trick that people have, the brick trick or cinder block trick that people use with cars sometimes in movies and TV shows. I actually know at least I know at least one person in real life who actually has done that trick with a cinder block. It didn't end terribly well for the car in question, just so you know. It's actually quite a funny story, but it's also a rather long one, so I'll spare you guys that one. Now, another thing that we saw during that big action sequence with the chase and all that was the ship coming down and them trying to pull the kids from the vehicle up to the ship. Now, what we saw there sort of reinforces my feeling that these younglings might not be terribly skilled with telekinesis, because if there was ever a situation where a little TK would have come in handy, that would be it. Now, granted, if somebody breaks their concentration during the middle of that could be extraordinarily bad, but dire circumstances. So again, I think that they just don't have the training to sufficiently use telekinesis to that degree. Now, Ahsoka, we've seen, is at least average when it comes to telekinesis. She's done some pretty decent stuff. I mean, she even manages to use TK to throw General Grievous in this episode. But Ahsoka's got her hands full, so she can't really do that. Now, we do get to see a little bit more of David Tennant as Hugh Yang, which I was certainly pleased about. He didn't have any lines at all last time around. But one thing that he did say does somewhat bother me, and that's where he mentions that he has been serving the Jedi Order for 1,000 generations. Now, depending on exactly how many years you define a generation, this is a somewhat questionable statement if you take him to be speaking literally. Now, if you take a generation as being about 25 years, okay, 25 years is about a reasonable time when people would have children. If you do that, of course, then that would make it mean he's been serving the Jedi Order for 25,000 years. And that's basically, at the time of the Clone Wars, roughly how long the Jedi Order has been in existence. So unless Hugh Yang was basically made by one of the first Jedi on Tython, back before back when they were like still fighting with metal swords, and referring to the Force in terms of the Ashla and the Bogan, the light and the dark side, respectively. Yeah, now, okay, if you dial it back a little further and say a generation is 20 years, then okay, then maybe what he's saying is a little bit more reasonable. But if I'm remembering my Jedi history correctly, the Jedi Order has, during that time, been driven to the brink of near annihilation. Only a few handful of Jedi surviving, and then them managing to come back from that. Most famously illustrated in the second Knights of the Old Republic game. That means that both times Hugh Yang somehow managed to survive. Now, okay, he's a droid. He's certainly not going to die of old age. And it's not inconceivable that there could be a 20, 25,000-year-old droid out there somewhere. But again, it's just extremely unlikely. Now, if you just take it a point as he's speaking somewhat metaphorically, then okay, it's a little more. Well, I hesitate to say that it's a little bit more acceptable. But yeah, okay. Let me put it this way: it's much more unlikely that if you take him as having speaking metaphorically, to stick in the craw of overly obsessive Star Wars fans such as myself. At least I admit it, okay? Now, yeah, let's talk briefly about Hondo. Now, again, I do have to reiterate my complaint for this season so far that Hondo has really, really been overused in the early part of this season. Now, I still like Hondo, but I think after this, they need to basically either give this guy the rest of the season off, or just save him to come back and do something really cool at the end of the season. Because as much as I like Hondo, I don't think he needs to be turning up every single episode. Heck, I mean, we've seen more of Hondo, I think, at this point than we have seen of Anakin. And at the end of the day, Star Wars, at least the first 6 Star Wars movies, are essentially, in many ways, the story of Anakin Skywalker. Now, who knows where things are going to go in the future now that Disney's running the show, but, whatever. That's outside the scope of what we're talking about here. But, yeah, Anakin should really not be overshadowed too much during this era of Star Wars. At least that's my opinion. And let's do briefly talk about Ahsoka here. Again, Ahsoka showing herself to be a very capable Jedi, very capable leader. She even manages to, once again, hold her own against General Grievous. Yeah, they have tangled before. Now, the question, of course, is we've seen General Grievous just mow through Jedi, through Padawans, through Knights, and even Masters. So the question, of course, is, how is it that Ahsoka is able to just flat out not die? Well, one, Ahsoka is an extremely skilled Jedi, especially for someone her age. She's been trained by Anakin. He is, no denying it, the chosen one. And she's also, just by proxy, been under the influence of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is, again, one of the greatest duelists in the Jedi Order. Now, I don't know if they've ever really shown them, maybe in the comics or something, Obi-Wan taking a little time to spar with Ahsoka or something. But you have to think that, just by being around him, she's probably picked up some stuff. And Obi-Wan is the guy who does ultimately defeat and kill Grievous in Episode 3. So if there's any Padawan out there who's going to be able to hold their own and survive fighting General Grievous, it's Ahsoka. But again, you also have to take into account Grievous's personality here. Grievous likes to toy with Jedi. He likes to see them afraid and know that they're going to die. I can't really remember what those episodes were called, but if you remember the Gennady Tartakovsky Clone Wars episodes, there is a really phenomenal scene where Grievous just annihilates a group of Jedi, and there's one Jedi, a Padawan, who looks suspiciously like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, who's practically about to wet his pants. He's so freaked out. And you have to think, Grievous just flat out has to be getting off on that. And that's probably him. That's probably some of what was going on here. He was trying to toy with Ahsoka, and it backfired on him. She was able to hold her own well enough to get into a situation where she could escape. And, that definitely probably had to be part of why he was so upset, in my opinion. There's a part of Grievous that really might have been saying to him, if he just turned it on 100%, he could have killed Ahsoka and really screwed with Anakin and Obi-Wan, who are two of his greatest enemies. And he blew that opportunity. Speaking of that, Clone Wars, I did like that they mentioned that Grievous does collect lightsabers. That was, again, something that was established on the old Gennady Tartakovsky Clone Wars show. That's something that did occasionally pop up in the comics, and I'm sure it's been referenced at least a few times in the novels. And I always liked that. I always thought that was a very, very creepy aspect of Grievous. So I'm glad they did play into that and, used it, because it was used very effectively. It really does remind us as to just why the Jedi take Grievous so seriously. Yeah, let's go and talk about Hondo, since he's kind of one of the big things this episode. And one thing that I do like about Hondo is he is genuinely a very morally ambiguous character. Now, he is I don't really know if I want to call him a rogue. I mean, that's just such an overused term in shows like this, but it's very obvious that Hondo is in some ways from the Han Solo school of things. But unlike Han Solo, who, despite some grumbling and complaining and a little snarking, very quickly got on the side of the good guys. Star Wars loves to have these characters, these guys who are sort of neutral or in the middle, and they don't really want to do anything, but then just stuff happens and they have to decide they want to take a stand on things. They did it with Han Solo, they did it with Dash Rendar. Lando did genuinely kind of betray the heroes, but he quickly started to redeem himself. Even Talon Card was like that a little bit. But at the end of the day, those guys all ended up on the side of the good guys. Hondo's a little bit different. Hondo is a guy who, he even says, today I'm in a mood to be nice to children. Hondo's a guy who, if you ask me, is interesting because whether or not he's going to help you or stab you in the back is going to entirely depend on just how it is he feels that day. Even money may not trump just whatever Hondo's whim is. And that is actually genuinely interesting in terms of storytelling and characterization and all that other stuff. Now, not to say that Hondo doesn't like his money. This episode's where he's basically trying to stick Obi-Wan with a ridiculously inflated bill makes it quite clear that he does. But, his little nod to the Jedi girl and all this other stuff, again, it does show us that Hondo is not 100% bad. But I also like the fact that Ahsoka quite clearly points out to Hondo, so she just says, wait a minute, you want to help children today, but just basically the other day you were perfectly fine with attacking a ship full of children in order to rob their ship. So again, I do love that this show is consistent that way, because if they hadn't said that, that would have been something that I almost certainly would have been sitting here complaining about. So, again, I do think that they need to give Hondo a break, but I still like him. I still think he's a really nice addition to the Star Wars mythos. And seeing a character who is genuinely like him, very morally ambiguous, and being written in so well and acted so well, it really does bring a nice element to the show. Now, one other thing that I wanted to talk about, it's mentioned what happened, that something happened when Yoda went on a quest to find his lightsaber. Now, I was reading, I can't remember if it was the I'm pretty sure it was the Jedi Path, a book that came out, a Star Wars book that came out several months ago, and it's quite cool, where Yoda kind of mentions being a youngling at one point. Now, this sort of clashes with the history established for Yoda in the comics. The short version of that there is that Yoda would have joined the Jedi Order when he was an adult of his species. Here, it seems to imply that Yoda joined the Jedi when he was also young. And, of course, these two things contradict. But Star Wars is, of course, as has been very much established, has various levels of canon. You know, the movies are always the absolute word on everything, with stuff like Clone Wars coming in basically a very close second. So, I've kind of resigned myself to a lot of things from the comics, or at least from around the time of the movies of the Clone Wars and other stuff, are to various degrees probably going to get chucked out the window. Which is sort of a shame because the comics, especially the stuff written by John Ostrander, are really very excellent Star Wars stories in many cases. But, that's just the nature of the beast. And at the end of the day, even if something isn't in continuity anymore, to me, that doesn't mean that it's less of a good story. I mean, sure, it's never fun to see a story you like thrown out of continuity, but that doesn't mean that it stops being good or that it's less good. It's just no longer a part of continuity. The story is still there. How you feel about the story is still there. So, yeah, I think that covers everything that I have to say for this episode. Again, overall, pretty solid stuff. I enjoyed watching this one. As always, folks, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.